Well, good afternoon. Kapla. Oh, well, let's get a little bit more. Kapla. All right, honorable guests and warriors, welcome to the Anthropology of the Bat'leth. My name is Billy Chung, and today we are gathered to delve deep into the history and cultural significance of one of the most iconic weapons of the galaxy. Our quest for today's panel is none other than the renowned anthropologist who has previously graced the stages of the 55 and the 56-year mission in Las Vegas, delivering captivating talks on this very same topic we're about to explore today. Our distinguished expert has also led in the discussions on the blood feuds of Andoria's past, making a perfect fit for today's conversation. So today, he will enlighten us further on the Bat'leth, tracing its origins from the mythical tales of Kahless the Unforgettable to its modern-day use of battles of the Klingon Empire. So sharpen your blades, tighten up your sashes, and let us raise a glasses of blood wine and give a resounding cry of kapla as we embark on this epic adventure today. Please welcome Brian Fields. So before we begin, let me start by asking all of you a question. Have you ever wondered how we learn? Understanding the mechanics of learning is a crucial foundation for any study or pursuit, and it's about to unlock a world of possibilities that you never knew existed. Brian, can you share your thoughts on this incredibly exciting topic for us?
Certainly. One of the ways we learn is visually. Another way we learn is by tactile experience and doing something hands-on. And some people can learn from reading, just taking the information in, comprehending it, and then putting it back into practice. But one of the best ways we learn is then by teaching, because then we're able to show what we've learned to someone else. And if they can comprehend what we're explaining, then we know we've come full circle in that process of learning. So today, we're going to have a little bit of a hands-on demonstration. We're going to have a little bit of local learning. And at the end of it, we'll have a couple of special surprises for people. So if you have questions at the end, there will certainly be time for that. And I'll be thrilled to answer any of them.
All right, so let's talk about honor. In a society where honor is more valuable than life itself, where every action, every decision, every breath is taken with the utmost consideration for one's honor. This is the world of the Klingons, and the concept of honor runs through the very fabric of their culture. Just how crucial is honor in the Klingon way of life?
So, for Klingons, honor is everything. You could honestly decide that the honor of yourself and other people are more important than your physical existence, because it's one of the few things that will outlast you. So, first, let's define it. Honor is a social construct to start with, from hands down. It is a contract between you and society and how you're supposed to act. Now, this does not necessarily mean that's ethics and morals. That's a completely different discussion. But honor is how you value yourself and then how you value other people. You could almost say that honor is the golden rule. If you treat someone a certain way, you expect them to treat you in a similar fashion. That is the social contract behind honor. Now, there's been a few societies out there that have had honor-based motives. I think the easiest one to point at is samurai. Another one would be Scottish Highlanders, Vikings, because they all handled the notion of family, tradition, value, loyalty, cultures. These are all things that fall under the concepts of honor, and how you treat yourself, how you treat other people, and how you wish society as a whole to look at you and value you, regardless of who you are as a person. In doing so, Kalish realized a very simple concept. We have a warrior culture, but how does that warrior culture thrive if it can't figure out how to live together? And that's where the concept of honor comes from.
So when we think about the legendary warriors of the Klingon Empire, what is it that truly defines their identity as a race? What sets them apart from all other beings in the universe, and what makes their culture so captivating and unique?
I think one of the interesting things that sets Klingons apart is the fact that they have redundant organs. Just in and of itself right there, having the ability to have like 2 hearts and 1 gets stabbed and you can still keep going, that's pretty impressive. I don't know how many other people could do that. Like, flesh wound. Are we gonna eat dinner later? So, one of the other things that sets them apart is the society is a meritocracy. When it comes to, they've developed words for genders, but they also had, in the original Klingon, words for just that person. So they had a word that wouldn't care whether you described someone as female or whether you described them as male. They didn't care. They considered a lot of those words superfluous. Didn't matter, because what mattered is you could pick up a bat'leth and that you could wield it. If you can hold the weapon in a fight, they don't care what you look like. If you can do it honorably and defend other people, all the better. But there's some rules that come to this, and we'll get into those in a minute. But their entire society is based on the notion that I can defend myself, I can defend what belongs to me, and I can defend the people I care about. That's honor, that's a social construct. And that's the foundation of their entire society. They don't care about right and wrong. They don't care about good and evil. They care about those concepts in and of itself right from the beginning. And it's the foundation of that ideology that is the embodiment of this weapon.
I'm thrilled to explore this next topic of cultural comparisons between some of the most iconic elements of the Klingon universe. From the origins and the cities that shape their societies to the awe-inspiring weaponry that they wield with deadly precision and the cutting-edge starships that carry them across the cosmos. Each of these elements is rich in meanings, steeped in tradition, and brimming with captivating nuances that set the Klingons apart from all other species. Can you talk about the similarities and differences that make each of these topics so compelling in their own right?
Sure. So let's talk about some of the similarities. The Klingon culture started below ground. It was a culture that originally, when you see Worf devolve into kind of a crab-like creature with mandibles and various other things, this was a culture that started below ground. Now, during Molar's time, and when Kalish finally took over as emperor, there was obviously above-ground settlements that started to occur. Now, depending on which Klingon scholar you talk to, and there's a number of them out there, you will get a different answer for every single one as to when exactly. Was it the 9th century? Was it later in the 9th century? Was it after Kalish's death? And I don't think it was after, because a lot of the stories talk about various events that occurred above ground. But Molar was fond of sacrifice, and the sacrifices always occurred at underground lava pits. Their embassies are still underground. In fact, the Andorian embassy on Kronos is an underground culture, or still an underground city. Now, Earth comparisons, we had cultures like that. In the central Anatolia region of Iran, there was Derin Kuyu, Olmos Kanak, and a few others of the Cappadocian area that did that. And there was, the largest one, Derin Kuyu, had 20,000 people living in it, and it was in like the 2nd century. So these were cultures that were around for a long time, and they could thrive. They didn't necessarily need to be above ground, but often for us, it was we wanted to safeguard ourselves from our enemies. And when you consider that some of the early tenets of Christianity started in some of those cultures, and they were trying not to be persecuted by Mithrans or various other religions of the time, or the Roman Empire to be specific, that was a way to make sure that you could practice safely, still have a society, still grow as a people. The difference is that in the 14th century, the Klingons were invaded by the Hurk. When the Hurk came in, they took a number of things with them, including the Sword of Kalish. But what they left behind was technology that took the Klingons a few centuries to reverse engineer and start to make use of themselves. I wonder what would happen if that had happened on Earth. Their clearly feudal society of clan-based cultures and families clearly moved into a space-level progression much sooner. Because you went from, and it's not hard to see, now granted mine's blunted, but those edges on these weapons, including the Diktok dagger, which was probably the oldest weapon they have in their culture, were beveled edges. They were not scalloped like what you would see on modern swords. So they say one of the legends of Kalish is that he was able to carve a statue of Lady Lucara. Well, this isn't good for carving a small thing, but if you wanted to carve a 20-foot statue out of stone, you could absolutely use a stick and pound away at a rock and make it work. It would just be a very large sculpture. So, with that in mind, they went from one type of tunnel in an underground society to an above ground, and then finally to another type of tunnel-based society on a spaceship. And that all happened about the 14th century. From their notions, there's two main cultures. Now, you could argue privateers because of the way they rated other cultures. You could argue a number of different societies that match it, but I think the two that come the closest will probably be the orders of chivalry that we're used to in Western European society, and then the code of Bushido that we see in Japanese and the samurai. Now, when it comes to the orders of chivalry, many people think that it was laissez-faire, I'm going to protect my lady, and things like that, where they would pose and take a flower in favors. And those things really didn't come around until they started holding tournaments for jousting. They really didn't take off until then because it was a pageantry. It was about making a show and displaying something. The foundations from three authors in the 12th, 13th, and 14th century who never met each other but wrote similar notions was that you needed to have a horse. That was the very first requirement. The same way that a Klingon prides himself on having their ship. You needed to be able to field yourself and your retainers that could provide for you. So a knight just didn't come along and show up and like, hey, what's up? Who? I'm gonna hit that guy? Right. They showed up with their squires, the people that were gonna make their tent, the people that were gonna also make the food for them. It was a small retinue, and some of them could still fight. And of course the squire was the one being trained, and so they would probably see combat. But there were rules of engagement back then where if the squire struck another knight, you could kill the squire for simply doing that. It doesn't sound as nice as it might seem, because that's a fairly brutal concept. Like, yes, you defended your lord, but they could require the squire be put to death for striking a belted member of nobility. That's a little brutal, but so are Klingons. When you get to the idea of Bushido, there are roughly 8 tenets for Bushido. One of the first tenets is rectitude. It is knowing when to do something when the time is right. To act when the act is right, to strike, to die, but also to live. It was one of the beautiful things about that is that most of our cultures take these items of war and that's all they talk about. But they forget notions like the Klingons plowing his father's field with the sword of Kalish. So he planted something with the weapon. And we talk about sword to plowshares all the time. Then there's the notion of benevolence in the Bushido Code. And in that notion, benevolence is having the ability to do something. For instance, the samurai were allowed to test their weapons on peasants. Yeah, let that set in. So, you walk up, you tell the two people in front of you, could you stand there? John, could you get behind them? Yeah, okay. And then you thrust the sword through all 3 of them and pull it out. The blade's still good, they're all dead. Yeah, it's a good 3-sword person. That was something they could do, and they could not get in trouble for it. Unless that person belonged to someone who was above them in station. And that would be the only way that they see any penalty for their actions. Klingon culture is a lot of the similar notions. You're going to be running across people who look at the bat'leth as a symbol of power, and then other people who, if you pay attention to Kalish's teachings, the bat'leth is not just a physical thing. The bat'leth is also an idea and a concept. Because one of the things Kalish thought about was that how is my society going to grow? How do I let these warriors thrive and populate? Well, I need for them a method to do it. In a very similar way, you will see the samurai depicted as holding tea ceremonies and showing politeness. And all of those notions, the Klingons needed to do the same thing. Having the ability to take a life and knowing when not to do it is as important. There's a story of Kalish outside one of the cities in his youth, talking to a fool when a sandstorm was coming. And the fool told him that, I'm not afraid of a storm. I will stand here and meet the storm. Kalish said, I respect your decision. And he walked inside the city. He came out the following day, and the man was dead. And he walked up. Only a fool doesn't respect the storm. There was always going to be something bigger than you. But trying to prove yourself over a fruitless endeavor was wasted. The same way that they have the notion of killing a fool brings no honor. Wielding this so that you can show your power is not the true merit of the bat'leth. Wielding it to protect your people and the things you care about, even if it's at opposition with someone else, that is the purpose behind the bat'leth. And I think we find that many people during this time forget that we use these concepts today. So, how many of you are over, let's just choose a number, 40? All right, how many of you had a backache? How many of you didn't want to get out of bed necessarily on a particular day because something hurt? Or something new hurt and you didn't even know what it was yet? Who got up and went to work still? When you attack those concepts, the same things that can lead to anxiety, fear, depression, you are wielding a bat'leth. That is your own mental ability to fight something that you don't want to do and still conquer these notions. That is what he wanted to create. That is the similarities between our culture and them. It's the things that hurt us the most that actually bond us over it.
Yeah, I love that analogy there. Let's move on to oral traditions. From timeless fables and parables that pass on ancient wisdoms through the ages, to the thrilling legends of the Sword of Kalish and the Honor's Blade. Each of these tales is steeped in meaning and significance. These stories serve not only to entertain and to inspire, but to shape the very fabric of Klingon society, imbuing every aspect of their culture with a sense of honor, courage, and resilience. Can you talk a little bit more about each of these stories?
So, there is a notion of a kinning, and a kinning was a phrase, it's not dissimilar to a parable, but it's how did you hide a true meaning inside wording for other things? So, a good example would be, if you were going to try to have someone meet you at a certain place, like John and I are going to go meet and we're going to go watch the stars. And so you tell John, meet me at the tree with the crooked branch. You know the one missing the leaves on that branch? And John knows exactly where to go now. But that's the kinning. That's the story that you've conveyed additional information, but not actually said what you're trying to get him to do. And just say, meet me at the first starfall. All of those things can convey layers of meaning, but only to the people who understand what the meaning to the kinning is. Modern day versions of it is simply cryptography and being able to pass coded messages. Now, where it comes to parables, and I think people tend to forget, so I'm sure some of you probably saw the holographic background map of Kronos and maybe Star Trek Discovery. And at one point, if you zoom in on it, you'll see Mount Christock, where Kalish took some of his hair, which I realize I don't, but Kalish already did it for me, so it's okay, and plunged it into the volcano, and pulled it back out, and kept that particular part. Not that it burned away, but that he got carbon from it. And he had to keep that plot of lava with the carbon in it hot, and hot enough to walk 200 miles to Lake Lurser. So when you hear the parable of Kalish plunging his hair into the volcano and then putting it into the lake, it sounds like the lake was like right next door. No, he had to keep reheating that thing for the entire walk down. So the easiest way to do it, and what they don't tell you in the tales, is that he probably started a fire every night when he went to sleep, and then threw that piece of lava rock into it so it would stay warm enough that when he got to the thing, he could cool it off. But that's the only way he got carbon into the metal he needed. And the metal they're talking about is baconite, which is like steel, but roughly 10% denser. So if you took the same thickness and made it out of steel, you're looking to add an additional 10% of weight to it, because the density of the crystallization in the metal was 10% denser. And that's why when you hear Jadzia talk about, I need something that's, roughly 11 pounds, because she mentions the number of kilograms, and when you translate it to pounds, it's like, this is an 11-pound weapon, which they did a wonderful job. If anyone saw Picard Season 3, and I hope to God I'm not spoiling anything for you, and if I do, I'm really sorry. But when you see Riker try to pick up the Kurlith from Worf, and all of a sudden it's like, what the hell? Yeah, Bacchonite's supposed to be that heavy. However, Jadzia, to her credit, whipped it around like it was supposed to be because she had Curzon's muscle memory. So, the next story, they slew the Serpent of Zol with the weapon. Now again, get 5 Klingon historians in the room. Ask them what they think the Serpent of Zol is. You will get 5 different answers. The biggest item is that it was I believe the tale roughly reflects to the notion of winter was coming, or winter for Kronos at least. And there was a city not far away near Zol. They don't have it listed on any map that I can find, not in canon lore. I've seen it listed in licensed things, but when we stick to canon stuff, it just hasn't been mentioned yet. He killed it, and this is my favorite part of the story, so that the village could survive. So he provided food for a village for the winter. So again, it's hunting and providing, the honorable social contract that you hold with how people, you want them to see you. And so he did that for people that could not thank him. They didn't have a way to say thank you other than just to give platitudes and words. That was the only way that could be done. They talk about the carving of the statue for Lady Lucara, who later establishes the Order of the Batleth for her husband in order to maintain Klingon honor in society. We'll get into more of that later. I always like to think that at one point he made a Batleth for her and that she probably had the second one. But it's not been proven in canon. It just, the next example we have of the Batleth, other than Kalish's original, if we call that the Type 0 or the Foundation, is the one that's on the medal that Lady Lucara created. And I'd like to think it's her Batleth that's actually on it. So when you see the medal being handed out to the people in DS9 and stuff like that, when Martok and Gowron are handing them out, that's the second representation of a Batleth ever. And it, oddly enough, didn't have the spike in it. It was the first one that kind of went with this design. Now, he tilled his father's fields. Kalish loved family. And he wanted everyone else to know that too. And that's why he was so angry at his brother when his brother lied and brought dishonor to his family and he had to chase him down. And his brother, in a spit of, being, I'm cranky, decided to throw their father's sword into the sea. And they say that Kalis went into the ocean for 3 days and 3 nights. I think the reality is that Kalish probably spent 72 hours worth of time looking for it. So 3 days and 3 nights. But the likelihood that he spent 3 days and nights holding his breath underwater seems a bit of a stretch, even for someone with, 4 lungs. So that's the notion between understanding how history wants you to present itself and how reality probably happened. Out of all of those stories, I think the one that showcases, if we go back to Bushido for a small second, politeness, the best way is the highest form of politeness is love. And if you're ever looking for an equality in the sexes or genders, when he took his vows and said, I'm going to take you as my mate, and Lucara accepted, after probably throwing pottery. When that happened, 500 of Kiri's soldiers from Molar raided their wedding in an attempt to get back at them. While reciting poetry to each other about their vows and what they wanted the other one to understand as love, they fought off the 500 soldiers together. He didn't try to protect her, he fought with her. She was his equal, his partner. That is politeness, treating someone with the respect that they're given. The highest form of it is love, and probably the wonderful note to end the stories on.
Awesome. Let's talk about forging the spirit of a people, right? How do you cultivate and fortify the indomitable spirit of these legendary warriors? What methods, rituals, and practices are necessary to mold the raw courage, unwavering loyalty, and fierce determination that defines the Klingon way of life?
it wasn't enough that Kalish could make a weapon and kill someone with it. Kalish needed to do the deeds that we talked about in some of the other stories. If he wanted to make sure that Klingons did not turn into a people that sacrificed themselves, but rather grew, a people that didn't bow down to a tyrant, but fought for their own rights and independence, the same way they got rid of their gods when they talk about the foundation of Klingon culture. They're like, you're too troublesome, get out. And when the god's like, no, really, I can help. I'm like, all right, well, we're just going to kill you and get rid of you because you're kind of annoying. You have to do something like that. So it wasn't just that he could make a weapon, and he had to then do something useful to it. And so I'm sure there were some of you in here that might have been in the class earlier today for the Battles for Beginners. When they talk about the Katbalal festival, they are talking about the defeat of Molar by Kalish. And that is the single greatest act that unified the Klingon people, because he literally changed society as we understand it. If we look at human history and the number of things that change society, we don't look at a single person. We look at a number of people changing facets of society. This man changed everything. That's why Kalish is the unforgettable. That's why people remember him to this day. He changed how society worked. He took people from underground to surface. He led them in a way that would allow them to still adhere to their warrior traditions and yet grow as a people and nurture someone and care for them and make them feel wanted and respected. Klingons don't care if you're a male or a woman. They don't care if you're straight or gay. Can you pick up the sword and defend yourself and defend others? If that's it, and that's what you can do, you're in. When it comes to trying to make this great, people always talk about the sword is the most powerful tool for war, and certainly it's iconic enough to do so. The thing that I think people forget is there is a person holding the sword. The flesh will always be the strongest tool in the implementation of a weapon. Without this, it's just a tool. Whether good or ill, it's just a tool. So, one of the things I do when trying to understand why I talk about the culture and the stories and stuff, I do medieval reenactment, and we also go overseas for Team USA, and we fight in tournaments. If you look up Armored Combat Worldwide, you'll see some of them. But this is a grand falchion. It was used in the 13th and 14th centuries. It started out in France, but the origination actually occurred in the Crusades, where you see the weapons and stuff change in history. It is the closest thing, oddly enough, to what the curliff turned into. When someone was trying to explain it to me, all I need is a hole right up there in the very divot, and it would basically be that weapon. But the interesting part to it is that it's nothing without me holding it. It can't do anything by itself. It doesn't fly, it's not magical. And I think the writers had a wonderful idea of trying to not make the bat'leth or even the Sword of Kalish magical. It wasn't a magic item. It was the person that put it to use that did it. And the mystique around the great deeds of the sword, and that I could potentially accomplish those same great deeds if I held it. So, just remember that this is just a tool. It hurts, and the only thing different between this and what you might consider a real weapon is that we're required to have ours be blunted. But otherwise, it's still absolutely a sword.
So then when we take a look at the Klingon weaponry and the bat'leth specifically, would that be considered even the blade for the ages?
Oh yeah. So the blade for the ages is that we're looking at a weapon that survived 1,500 years. So it starts in the 9th century, roughly the late 800s of what we would call the 800s for Klingon society. And Kalish is said to disappear around 922 to 950. Again, your various scholars will vary on the date, but it's roughly about that time. He changed everything. But, and I'll set this here. So we know that the first one had a spike in the center, and that would be type 0. If you take the bar out right here, that would be technically type 1. It would be Lucara's bat'leth. Now, I had this one custom designed for me, just because I liked where the grips were, and I could still half sword. And a half swording technique is when you simply take both hands, and then you're able to either block or thrust, and you turn that sword into basically a crowbar or a big stick that you can use like a small bow staff to then grip people over the head and sweep their leg, letting them fall. And then once they're on the ground, I gotta be honest, the fight's over for you. I mean, you can fight, you can kind of swing from the ground if you're gonna try to scoot away, but you're done. Because I'm just gonna stab you in the leg, and when you can no longer stand up to come chase me, I'll leave you there to bleed out. And then move on. Now, if you have a phaser, I'll stab you in the head. Because that would hurt. All right, so this would technically be type 2, it's the most common used one. Now, when we talk about clang, and you see him in, obviously, the original TOS, but then later in Deep Space Nine, when you have the albino episode and stuff like that. That one, he referred to this as the Warrior's configuration. And the reason for the Warrior's configuration was that if you're going to have a weapon, and your entire society is going to make use of it, because the bat'leth was not restricted to a nobility class. It's the symbol of honor. And if every Klingon is supposed to have honor, then every Klingon should have the right to use one. Now, that may have been different for other weapons. The Kurlev could be something different. We may learn more about that later, or we may not. But the Digtok was obviously a tool item. There was also the Gintok spear. But when it comes to this was supposed to be honor. And now honor can take many forms for many people because everyone has a different viewpoint of what they consider honorable. But this became the mass-produced thing because then the military could make it in large quantities for everybody, and this is why you see it on all the ships, and it's the most common design, not necessarily the best design. And another thing you would find is that houses would reward people who fought for them with giving the idea like, all right, you won that battle, your technique was perfect. Would you like to design your own bat'leth? So as much as people, I noticed a lot of hate when it came to the Discovery bat'leth that had the recurved blades, except that if you looked at the grip in the very center of that bat'leth, there was a pearl or a gem there. And if you pushed it, I don't think it's too hard of a stretch at that time to think that maybe you could have split the bat'leth in half. And if you looked at that bat'leth again in half, you had two very large mechliths or kurliths. So how do you sneak a 5-foot weapon into an enemy stronghold? Break it apart. And then it can snap back together when you need it. And if you took those other blades off the front of that recurved bat'leth, they made perfect Kutluch daggers. So then you could hide the daggers in the boots. Hide one thing as a sword, put another one on your back. When you get inside and you're ready to go to town, snap it all back together and let it roll. And as much as people wanted to give credit for the blades that curved backwards, I think we're ignoring, now, most people call them scimitars. Other people will look at me and go like, I thought you studied history, it's called a shamshir. Or you will also run into other ones, depends if we're talking from Slavic or if we're talking from Arab nations, but almost every sword used on horseback had a curve to it. Katana. So I don't know why the particular bat'leth got a lot of hate, it just did, because it was a different weird design, but if you also look at the sculpture on the handle, it was heavy brass, or what would we call something that looked like brass. And it was also decorated with Klingon text. How many of you have ever seen a sword in a museum that had some kind of stenciling? Or you would see molten gold melted into etched parts of the blade? And you would beautify it, because it was another way to show off status or prestige or symbol or some reward for doing something grand. And they keep talking about this still being an honor dual weapon, because they needed a way for society to handle arguments. And if you could simply say to the person, I challenge you, and then you're not involving anyone else. And the society was built around the notion that if they died an honorable death, not only was that person absolved of anything, but the person who killed them often was let go. It was over. Our own legal system could learn a thing or two. So, When we get to the next stages where we see some of these weapons designed in very weird connotations, we have to understand they meant different things to different people. The same way we would have styles in martial arts. They would mean different things to different people. While I loved the ones that monks in Borath had, if you remember from season 2 of Discovery, I love that Mancatcher, which was that crescent moon inner blade section that you could just kind of catch and bounce someone around on the inside of the blades and keep cutting and cutting and cutting. It was fantastic. And if someone got out of that, great, I got a 4-foot blade on each side I could stab you with. Let's go. Those are wonderful things, but I don't know if they caught on besides the monk's use. Now, we also talk about the Battle of Breaking. In Warp and his brother Kern's on the ITS Hector, there is a broken bat'leth with a wooden handle connecting the two portions. The idea is that it's still a bat'leth, it's just another example of a bat'leth and how honor can be repaired. Now, I'm probably going to butcher this word, and I'm sorry, and humor me. Have any of you ever seen pottery with gold veins running through it? Okay, good. Kitsugaorki is roughly the term, and again, I'm sure I got some of the pronunciation wrong. I'm just going to have to accept that I'm not going to get that word right. But if you can put a wooden pole between two sections of a broken bat'leth to restore that weapon and allow it to fight again, then it's still more beautiful than the sum of its parts. And that notion of the Japanese pottery with the gold showing you that just because something is broken doesn't mean it can't be used, doesn't mean it can't find new life. When you are having a bad day and it hurts to get up and it hurts to see people, even if those people are your friends, you don't want to deal with something because your boss yelled at you at work, or you made it your, like a little bit of an ass of yourself at a party the other night, but you're ready to say apology, but you're so embarrassed you don't want to deal with that person only because you're just afraid you're going to screw it up again. Remember the broken bat'leth. It can always be found again. And as the golden lines of the pottery show, it can always be more beautiful in sharing pain. Because often when you do, it helps you get over a number of things. This is one of those concepts. This is why the bat'leth is a weapon for the ages. There was polearm versions of it, and one of the most prominent examples of a bat'leth and its broken notions is the Tajtik. They were the blades that only the Chancellor could use. The blades were broken pieces of a bat'leth given handles, and they were the weapons they wore on their side. And only the Chancellor got to have it. And you know why? Because if the leader of my people can't carry broken honor and show that it can be restored, then what good are they?
Well, thank you, Brian. As we near the end of our discussion, I can feel the energy and excitement building up for what's about to come next, the Q&A. But before we dive into these questions, what are your final thoughts, insights, reflections on this epic journey we've taken together today? Most importantly, what pearls of wisdom do you wish to share with our eager audience?
I'm going to say it slowly. Suvi pu quantu be. There are no old warriors. Remember that statement. Remember that this is an idea as much as it is an implement. This is something you can carry in your heart, in your mind, and whenever you're having a bad day, you could still lean on a bat'leth. It can make a great crutch, I'm just saying. You having a hard time walking? Whip out your bat'leth. That's why you never leave home without it. Someone stops you in the street and wants to take your money? Well, we know what happens to that person. If someone else needs help, lend them your bat'leth. Even if it's a hug. Do you know that when you go to hug somebody, your arms are just as curved as this? Not wrong. Although it's going to look a little odd when you come in from 4 feet away and your arms like this wide. Like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm practicing type 2 hugs. But every day, we all run across different things. And this was the notion that Kalish was trying to pass on to people. Physical or mental. The bat'leth is something that we can hold in ourselves, share with other people. It cares not for your gender. It cares not for your proclivities of life. It doesn't care about any of it. It just cares that you're honorable. And that can be for anyone and anybody. And the more you share it, the greater it grows. And there is no end to that fruits of your labor. Suv we pu quantu lu be. There are no old warriors. When you stop fighting, you die.
Words of wisdom to live by. Well, now this is now your time to shine. What burning questions have been stirring in your mind throughout this incredible journey? What insights do you hope to gain from our esteemed expert? This is your chance to engage with the speaker and dive even deeper into the fascinating world of the Klingon Empire. And as an incentive, we have some awesome prizes to give away to the best question answered. And before you ask that question, no, he is not giving away the sword. He is not giving away that bat'leth, but we actually have something else better than that. So if you have a question, come on down. We've got a microphone right here. That way everybody can hear your question. We open it up to the floor.
You might have to turn the microphone around.
And you can pick up the microphone too. Don't be shy. There are no dumb questions except for the ones that are not asked.
This is a dumb question. Would you consider this statement that I'm about to say a Klingon statement? Anything is a weapon if you try hard and believe in yourself.
Yes.
Alright, sweet. I didn't know if there was going to be like no honor in just picking up something else to use as a weapon.
Oh no. If you can kill your enemy with a gospel, do it.
Sweet. Alright. Well then, remember folks, anything's a weapon if you try hard and believe in yourself.
Can you explain more in detail about the how Worf was feeling when he decided to space the Sword of Kahless?
So while I'm not Mr. Dorn and I can't express what his motivations are, I can give you my interpretation of that moment. If you had in your hands the Holy Grail, and you knew for a fact there wasn't a doubt, the same way that Worf didn't doubt that he had the Sword of Kahless, and you looked around at society today, everybody's going to try to take that thing and make it for them. And maybe that's not the best time to introduce it. Maybe the culture wasn't ready for it to come in back again. And that's why it would be better to leave it in the vastness of space than anything else, because clearly it survived in a cage for untreated, uncared for, I don't know, 1,400 years? Pretty sure it can survive in a zero-G environment again. I mean, I'm not sure if you need to do anything for the metal or stress when it comes to zero-G temperatures, but you could probably retemper it and everything would be fine. But if you had the Holy Grail and you found out it was just a cup and some miraculous things happened around it. Now, no offense to anybody, I'm not trying to destroy anyone's religious basis, I'm just using it as an example. If you had that, what you say next to a crowd could influence millions. And could you say that you would make the most honorable decision for society as a whole, like humankind? Because at some point today, you're gonna say something and someone's gonna disagree with you and then say like, that can't be the real thing. It must be a fraud, or that person's a fraud. Maybe it just wasn't time yet. And maybe Worf wasn't the right person to do it. At least, not then.
All right. Another question. We have 2 more prizes to give away, so far everybody's guaranteed to get at least one thing.
Sweet. I haven't fully formed this, but Worf kind of integrates like some Tai Chi into his bat'leth use. What would have been the Klingon response to that? Like the more pure Klingon response to that?
So while we understand it as being Tai Chi, it's not hard to figure out where they were given that training from. That is actually, the style is actually the Makbara. So if you look in Klingon lore, the Makbara was the martial art that Kahless came up to teach the discipline necessary to wield this correctly. Because, and for those of us who were in the class earlier, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to grip onto and understand. Because most people just want to do what they do with the sword, this motion. And while this works, it's not the only way it can work. Because you could still flip it around and present the least amount of target, and now it's a shield. And the minute someone strikes for my head, while I block, then I come underneath their sword because it's already lifted up, I raise it higher than them, and now my batleth is ready to poke them in the face. There's a number of additional techniques to try. We were just privileged enough to be taught some of the basics this morning. So that's what it was. It was the Makbara. And it's very similar to Tai Chi. It's supposed to teach you discipline, and it's not quick. The idea is that these things and these epiphanies that come with some of this practice should be done slowly, done right, done with perfection, and that takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. The same way that we don't heal overnight. We heal with time. We heal with sharing our pain. We heal with talking to people and knowing that we're not alone. The same thing is true for the Makbara. You don't gain proficiency without practice and patience and dedication.
All right, one more question. Anybody? Well, you've already asked a question. We have one more prize to give away. Why not? Just ask a good question. Any question. Just pull it out. Just yank it. There you go.
Sorry. Okay. You mentioned the linguistic part of having no gender in a form of addressing people with no gender. And I'm just curious if there's like other linguistic connections to concepts of honor or concepts of conflict. Like, what are the sensitivities around that change, like, as your relationship with the other person changes?
The majority of that change comes when dealing with, you would address a singular person, again, not gendered, or you would address a group. And that's the single biggest way. So, here's a good example. Suwi, warrior. Suwi-pu, warriors. So if you add pu to the end of it, so Klingon pu refers to Klingons. So if you want to hear, like, when people say Klingon Maj, it's really not said technically correct. It would be Klingon pu Maj. We are Klingons. That's the biggest issue when it comes to the linguistic parts of it. You could still angle it to say, if you wanted to refer to male Klingon warriors, you could say still female Klingon warriors, but simply saying plural or singular was the most they really cared about because they got rid of every word they didn't need to use. Like, it takes too much time. I have to make a battle cry and kill you, and I've got like 3 seconds to do it. I don't care if you're a girl, I don't care if you're a guy, you're going down.
All right. Well, as our incredible journey into the anthropology of the Bat comes to a close, let's give our esteemed speaker a round of applause.
Kapla! 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 One more time, kapla! Kapla!
Hopefully today you've gained a deep and profound understanding of the significance and symbolism of this legendary weapon in the Klingon culture. We've explored the origins, variants, and traditions of the Batleth, and uncovered a wealth of insights and revelations that will stay with us for a lifetime. We want to thank you for joining us on this epic journey. We hope that you leave here today feeling inspired, enlightened, and empowered to continue your exploration of the rich and vibrant world of science fiction and fantasy. And with that, I leave you with one final thought, Maj Ka, or well done in Klingon. It's been an honor and a privilege to share this journey with you, and we can't wait to see where the next adventure takes us. Kapla!
Kapla! Now, before everyone goes, could the people that asked the questions stand up?
Yes, let's go ahead and have our esteemed warriors come to the front.
We're going to do the grand prize at the end.
All right, so we have a grand prize. Now, I said we are not giving away those swords.
Right.
We are actually giving away this sword. Signed, who was it signed by again? Oh, Galron and Martok, the actors who have played those two characters. The grand prize goes to Brian. Brian.
It's going to go to the gentleman in the blue shirt.
Gentleman in the blue shirt, this is yours. I hope you didn't fly here because you're going to have to declare it.
So, now for everybody else,
There you go. We got Klingon patches for our remaining warriors. Congratulations.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all for coming.